I hate you. Has anyone ever said that to you before? Better yet, have you ever said those words to someone else? Or maybe you didn't say it to the person you wanted to say it to, but you certainly thought it in your head. You know, hate is a very strong and serious emotion. And I think the thing about hate that most of us would recognize is that hate leaves scars. Hate leaves scars on families that have been torn apart by it. Hate leaves scars on communities that have been shattered by it. Hate leaves scars on countries that have been divided and even destroyed by it. Hate is a powerful and even a terrifying motive for all kinds of evil in our world. But have you ever wondered, where does hate come from? Like, how do we get to this place in our world where people hate each other? Even more, how do you come to a place in your own heart where you find yourself hating another human being? Because hate, if I were to guess, has probably left a scar on your heart in some way. Like, I bet that there's someone who, if I were to simply say their name right now, you would have a visceral reaction to that name. Your heart would beat faster, and maybe you would start to clench your fists as you are flooded with those emotions of anger and disgust that come along with hate. I wouldn't be surprised if there's someone in your life that you hate. Hate leaves scars. Hate can drive you crazy. Hate can make you do things and justify actions that in normal circumstances you would be able to clearly call evil. Hate is powerful. And as we continue our sermon series on a guy by the name of Saul, King Saul of Israel, we're going to see how hate originated and developed and overcame Saul, leading him completely off of a cliff. So last week in this series was very significant for us as we're looking at this larger story of the rise and fall of King Saul, because we were introduced to a very important person in the life of Saul, a young man by the name of David. And we saw how David, who was secretly anointed as the next king of Israel by the prophet Samuel, entered Saul's court in order to help him from manic episodes that were triggered by some kind of mysterious tormenting spirit. David's a very skilled musician, and so his playing provides effective music therapy for the afflicted Saul. But we soon learn that David is more than just a good lyre player. He's also a giant slayer. Because in what is probably the most famous story in the entire Bible, David kills an incredibly large man named Goliath with only a sling and a stone, bringing peace to the entire nation. But what is so ironic about these two stories that introduce us to David is that they are initially very beneficial for King Saul. David's instrumental skills put his mind at ease, and his bravery and faith in the Lord brings about a great victory for the entire nation. But as time goes on, Saul is going to become increasingly annoyed, even threatened by this David kid. Because as time goes on, Saul is going to recognize that David is his replacement, right? He knows that God has rejected him as king and that God is working out someone else to fill his place. In fact, the words of the prophet Samuel is that God's going to find someone better than him to be king. And so the more time that Saul spends with David, the more obvious it's going to become that David is, in fact, a man after God's own heart. that he is this king to be, that he is better than him. And so before long, Saul will be consumed by a burning hatred for David, a hatred that will eat him alive. And if you're not careful, you could follow in his footsteps, and hatred could eat you alive as well. So if you have a Bible, I want you to open it up to 1 Samuel 18. Now, just as a little bit of backstory, David was very quickly becoming popular with the people of Israel. And of course he is, right? He just killed a giant. And since then, he has gone on quite a few military missions for Saul, and he's been successful wherever he is sent. So much so that the people even write a song about David. They say, Saul has slain his thousands, but David has slain his tens of thousands. And as you can imagine, Saul did not like the song very much. He saw it really hurt his ego. He found it infuriating. And so the text tells us that from that point on, Saul eyed David. He has a close watch on this David kid. He now recognizes him as a threat. Put another way, Saul is becoming very jealous of David. And so let's see how he handles his jealousy. Again, we're in 1 Samuel 18, and I want to begin by reading verse 10. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David evaded him twice. So what is our first sign that Saul is beginning to fall off a cliff here? What is our first sign that Saul is really starting to lose it? Well, it's his attempt to spear David to death. Now, we are told that Saul has another episode of this oppressive spirit, this, again, somewhat mysterious affliction that's been tormenting him. And whenever this spirit is, it's driving Saul crazy, to the point that he's raving, rocking back and forth, and talking to himself in his chamber. He's like he's a patient in an insane asylum. But as he experiences this episode, there in front of him is good old David, trying to help him, playing calming music on his harp. You see, David has an instrument in his hand, but what does Saul have in his? He has a spear, right? Just what you'd want an insane person to have, right? A weapon. And so in his fit of rage, he hurls his spear at David, not once, but twice. But David's able to escape. And again, this truly is insanity, right? Like, why in the world would Saul want to kill his best soldier? Why in the world would Saul want to kill this guy who's trying to help him? Why in the world would Saul want to kill this man who brought a great victory to the nation of Israel that helped him as king? Well, the text tells us why. Look at verse 12. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. So Saul wants to kill David because why? Because he is afraid of David. And I really want you to notice this, because this is such a critical point for this entire passage this morning. This sermon is going to be all about hate, all about Saul's hate, all about the hate that you find in your heart. But it's important for us to recognize, where does this hate start? Where does this hate start for Saul? Where does it start for you? I think in so many circumstances, it starts with fear. That's what it did for Saul. We see from this text that fear is what fuels hate. Hate is fueled by the fear that is in your heart. And we're going to talk more about that later on, but I need you to take note of that. That Saul's hate begins with fear. Fear fuels hate. Saul sees David as a threat. He's afraid of him because he knows that God is with him. He can see it very clearly, right? God has showered blessings upon David because David's heart is in line with the Lord's. But Saul's heart is far from God. And so God is far from him. And so Saul doesn't even want to look at David anymore. He's just sick of seeing his face. He wants him out of his sight. And so what does he do? He sends him to war. He puts him in charge of a battalion of soldiers, which is a relatively small number in comparison to the rest of Israel's army. And we can maybe, by reading between the lines, think that perhaps Saul is hoping that David being in charge of a smaller unit might increase David's chances of dying in conflict. Or at the very least, diminish his popularity and prominence with the people. But Saul's plan backfires. David has great success, and the people love him. With each passing day, he is becoming more and more of a war hero in the eyes of Israel. And Saul is, all the more, threatened by this. His jaw drops to the floor as he sees David's success, and the text tells us that he stands in fearful awe of David. Again, he sees that the people love David more than they do himself. David's more popular, more successful, more brave. And I bet the prophet Samuel's words were just constantly ringing in Saul's mind as he looks at this guy David, that God is going to give your kingdom to someone who is better than you. David, Saul, is better than you. Saul knows it's true. He can't deny it. David's better. David is better than him. And man, maybe you can relate to this in some way. Like, how do you feel when you know that someone is better than you at something? Especially something that you're passionate about or something that you value. Or that they have maybe something that's better than you do. Like, how do you feel when your neighbor pulls up with a better truck than what you have? Or your friend goes on a better vacation and posts about it on Facebook. Or your sister has a better, healthier marriage. Or your cousin has a better job. Our natural response is almost always to never celebrate that person, right? To never celebrate the success, but to be jealous and even resent them for what they have. That they have something that is better than what we have, what you have. And man, even if you were to be really honest, you probably, when you look at someone who has something better, kind of hope that that better thing will be taken away in some way. Like you secretly wish that your neighbor would total his truck. Or you crack a sinister smile when your cousin loses his job. Saul has a lot of those same sort of wishes regarding David right now. Because everyone loves David, including, to his dismay, his own family members. Look at verse 20. Now Saul's daughter, Michal, loved David. And they told Saul, and the thing, surprisingly, pleased him. Saul thought, let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. So Saul's daughter, Michal, is crushing hard on David. But Saul, again, surprisingly, sees this as kind of a sick opportunity. He feels as though he can use his daughter as a negative influence and even as a covert agent that could thwart David's success. But there's another reason why this marriage could prove beneficial. And that's because every bride, especially the daughter of the king at this time, requires a bride price. But David, again, being very young, doesn't really have any money at this point, doesn't really have any personal property. So what could he offer King Saul? Now, mind you, it's important for us to recognize that David has already earned the right to marry Saul's daughter, right? Because he's killed the giant, right? That was one of the parts of the deal, that whoever comes forward and defeats Goliath will get Saul's daughter's hand in marriage. He's already earned that. But David's being humble, and he's kind of insisting that Saul requires something of him. He feels like it's too easy, almost, to get Michal's hand in marriage. And so it's in this moment that I imagine Saul's face became like the Grinch's, right? When the Grinch has this wonderful, awful idea. He knows just how to take advantage of David's humility. He thinks to himself, I know the perfect bride price. Penises. If you're sleeping, hopefully you're awake now, right? But I'm not kidding. That's what he says. I want you to look at verse 25. Going down to verse 25. Saul said, thus shall you say to David, the king desires no bride price except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, that he may be avenged of the king's enemies. Now Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. And when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law. Before the time had expired, David arose and went along with his men and killed 200 of the Philistines. And David brought their foreskins, which were given in full number to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him his daughter Michal for a wife. But when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. You know, most people, when they maybe want to propose to someone, might go out and get some flowers, right? Or maybe a ring. What does David do, right? He has to go get foreskins, right? How romantic is that? Not at all. But there's a reason why Saul wants David to do this. The conniving Saul wants David to single-handedly fight 100 Philistines so that he will die in battle, right? In Saul's mind, there's no way that David's going to be able to do this without dying. You know, when Saul made David a commander of a small army, his hopes of him dying were kind of only guessed. We can only guess that. Now, in this instance, it's clear that the king wants David dead. And you're going to notice this pattern, that Saul's intentions and attempts to kill David will become bolder as time goes on, more and more obvious, more and more public knowledge. But in any case, Saul's plan once again backfires. Because not only does David not die in battle, but he fillets double the amount that Saul had asked for. I just imagine Saul's jaw hitting the floor when David comes in with 200 things to give to the king. In fact, we're told in verse 28 that Saul sees and he knows that the Lord is with David and that his daughter loved him. And it says that Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. What is the result of David's success for Saul? It sparks more fear, greater fear in Saul's heart. And what do you think more fear means for Saul? It means even more hate. There's a direct correlation. It says Saul was even more afraid of David, and so from that point on, Saul hates David. He is his enemy continually. From that point on, Saul is David's worst enemy. He hates him with a passion, and he's going to do whatever it will take to destroy him. And I just want to pause here for a second and ask you this. Is there some way, as you look at this pretty toxic relationship, is there some way that maybe you could relate to this? Like maybe you have at times felt like David. Like there was someone in your life who was persecuting you like Saul. There was someone that you knew that no matter what you did, no matter how nice you were for them, no matter how much you served them, they never seemed to appreciate you or even like you. Like maybe it was your dad. All your life, you tried to gain his approval. You played his favorite sport, hoping that he'd notice that. You got that job that was maybe the family business, or that was in line with what he had hoped for, maybe his expectations, and you were just hoping he'd say he was proud of you. Or maybe you gave him your time, your energy, and even money to try and help him out when he needed it. But it seemed that no matter what you did, all he ever gave you was criticism, outbursts of anger, and a nasty scowl. Or maybe it was your boss, or is your boss. You've done everything you can to toe the company line. You show up to work early, you leave late, and you put in your best effort. But you never seem to be noticed by her. In fact, whenever she talks to you, it seems that she always has a gripe with some small detail that you missed. You feel like she's out to get you, if you're being honest. Maybe you've been in David's shoes before. But maybe, if you're being really honest with yourself, you're guilty of being like Saul. Like it's always easier to resonate with the victim. So I really want you to be honest with yourself. Is there someone that you're being Saul to? Someone who you are threatened by, and so your disposition towards them is negative, even if they've never done anything bad to you. Like maybe it's that one girl in you and your husband's friend group that you guys hang out with. Maybe, this girl who's maybe drop dead gorgeous, who you're kind of jealous of, right? You just feel like she's so much prettier than you. And your husband's a gentleman. He doesn't ever bring it up. He's never said anything or done anything that was inappropriate, but you just find yourself kind of lying awake at night thinking, man, what if he has a crush on her? What if he's thinking about her? And so you find yourself obsessing over this, checking his phone when he's not looking to see if he's texting her, even though he never is. Or even straight up asking him questions about her to see what his response is going to be. And any chance you get, you make sure to say something negative about her to him to try to taint his opinion of her. And you just find yourself stewing when you think of her, just hating her. Or maybe it's that one coworker you have. You've been at your job for years, but all of a sudden there's this young guy who shows up and everybody just seems to love, especially your boss. It seems that everybody only has good things to say about him. And this bothers you because you know that pretty soon your manager is going to retire and that position is going to open up. And you're afraid that all those years that you've spent working hard to be a candidate for said position will be lost because some kid who's only been here 6 minutes will sweep in and get the position because everybody loves him. And so you're actively looking to try to find some dirt on this guy, trying to find something that you can use as blackmail when the time comes for a promotion. I just want you to think about it. Be honest with yourself. Is there someone that you're being a Saul to? Is there someone you're threatened by? Because, friends, fear fuels hate. And hate can lead you to some pretty dark places. For Saul, his fear of David has turned into hate. And his hate is going to lead him to increasingly blatant acts of violence. Now, for the sake of time, I want to really quickly summarize some of the key events of the next few chapters. So in chapter 19, it begins with Saul openly telling his servants and his son Jonathan that they should kill David. Again, it's not just like the secret ambition that Saul has to himself. He is openly telling people to kill David. But Jonathan, who is David's best friend, reasons with his father and convinces him to stop all this nonsense, which leads Saul to make a vow in verse 6. As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. Now, you got to understand, vows are a very serious thing. In fact, you might recall, if you've been tracking with this series, that when that Saul was set on killing his own son in chapter 14 because of a vow he made that Jonathan unknowingly broke. He took his vow so seriously that he was ready to kill his own kid. But guess how committed Saul is to this vow? Not very at all, because just a couple verses later, Saul has another fit of rage, and he once again throws a spear at poor Davy. But thankfully, Saul has bad aim and misses, and the kid escapes. But Saul is not going to quit. He wants David dead, and so he does a couple other things to try to kill David, and eventually David meets up with Jonathan and tells him about Saul's intention to kill him. But Jonathan denies this because he's like, hey, my dad made a vow to me. He promised me he wouldn't kill you. This can't be true. But David pleads with Jonathan to go and talk to his father and find out for himself. So Jonathan does. He confronts his father about David, and we're told in chapter 20, verse 30, that Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan. And he said to him, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman, as long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die. And when Jonathan protests, Saul hurls his spear at him. Again, this guy needs to take some spear training or something, because he just always misses when he throws it. But it's crystal clear. Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. This is the point of no return. Saul's fear has fueled his hate, and his hate is just throwing him off a cliff. He is descending into madness. It is propelling him to destructive actions, to the point that he tries to kill his own son because Jonathan is getting in the way of his vengeful wrath. And so David is officially an outcast. He's running for his life, and one of the places he stops is a place called Nob, and it's a town of priests. And the head priest, Ahimelech, not realizing that David is on Israel's most wanted list, provides him with food and shelter. And eventually, though, Saul finds out about this, and he confronts this priest, and it's here that we see the truly horrible place that Saul's seething hatred has led him to. I want you to listen to 1 Samuel 22, starting in verse 16. And the king said, you shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house. And the king said to the guard who stood about him, turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David. For they knew he fled and did not disclose it to me. But the servants of the king would not put their hand to strike the priests of the Lord. Then the king said to Doeg, you turn and strike the priests. And Doeg the Edomite turned and struck down the priests. And he killed on that day 85 persons who wore the linen ephod. In Nob, the city of the priests, he put to sword both man and woman, child and infant, ox, donkey, and sheep. He put to the sword. So Saul, who at one point could not enact the elimination of his enemies, orders the massacre of his own people, his own priests. It is an act of violence so heinous that not even his own soldiers will do it. Only one guy, who's kind of a snitch, is willing to carry it out. But the king orders this simply over a misunderstanding, simply because the priests helped David because they didn't know that Saul wanted David dead. It's truly a dark day in Israel's history. And it shows just how far off the deep end hate has taken the king. All because Saul feared David. And so as we end our time together this morning, I want to ask you this question. Is there a fear in your heart that is fueling hatred? Is there something or someone that you are afraid of that has fueled the fire of hatred? Now, sometimes our fears are legitimate, right? There are things that we are afraid of and we should be afraid of. There are people we are afraid of, and there's evidence for that, why we should maybe be afraid. But if those fears left unchecked, they can turn into hate that, like Saul, can eat you alive. And as I've kind of been thinking about this, my mind keeps going back to what's probably like the most divisive issue in our country right now. That really just gets people's blood boiling. And I'm a little nervous to even bring this up. But like if you want to have a fun conversation with someone, just say the word ice, right? That's going to rile people up. There's going to be different opinions. But I think most of us would agree that there is a lot of hate in our country right now because of this specific issue on both sides. And so the question is where does that hate come from? How do we get to that point? Well, I think the text shows us that hate is fueled by fear. And so if we understand people's fears, we might be able to somehow, some way, bridge a political gap that so many of us currently feel alienated by. I'm not trying to get political, but I want us, as neutrally, as least emotionally as we can, look at this as a kind of as a case study from both perspectives. So let's look at one side. What is this one side of the issue fear? The fear is illegal immigration. And like I said before, there are often good reasons for the fears that we have. People fear violence, documented violence, that is associated with illegal immigrants. You know, you think of instances like what happened to Laken Riley. You think about all these drug trafficking issues and the violence related to that. That's real. There's reason to fear. People fear the amount of tax dollars that are going towards supporting illegals, even, recently going towards supporting fraud. Wondering where that money's going. Even before the election, there was a lot of fears about, Elon Musk was one person talking about this, where there's this fear that if Republicans don't win the next election, there's going to be so many illegals in the country that we're not going to ever have a fair election ever again. That was a fear. And again, there are legitimate reasons for fears. But what happens is that those fears left unchecked can turn into hate. And maybe you've experienced this. Because you fear illegal immigrants because of what you see is kind of disturbing, really disturbing and scary. You found yourself dealing with hate. That maybe when you think of illegal immigrants, there's hatred in your heart, if you're just being really honest. Whenever you see a foreign person, whether they're illegal or not, you don't know. You see a Somalian, you're not sure. Maybe you hear them speaking a foreign language that's not English. You start to kind of, cringe a little bit. Get a little upset. Even with people who are not dangerous criminals. And of course, we see that hate can turn into bad actions. In severe cases, it can turn towards violence, towards immigrants, illegal or not. But at the very least, it can be with maybe a satisfaction, a sadistic sort of satisfaction in seeing brutal tactics enacted on people because they had it coming. They're getting what they deserve. Now let's think about it from the other side, right? Let's think about it from the other side. Some people fear ICE. or specifically, they fear authoritarianism. And when they see people getting snatched out of the streets or from their homes, including folks who aren't illegal immigrants, they are afraid. They are disturbed. But that fear, left unchecked, can turn into hate. Hate for anyone wearing an ICE uniform. Hate for people who voted for this. Hate for Trump supporters. Hate for any authority. And what we see happening is that people have allowed their hate to lead to some very destructive actions, like attacking ICE agents and DHS officers, even biting a finger off. Fear fuels hate. And we just see that, don't we? On both sides, fear is fueling hate. But again, going back to the initial question, what is it for you? Like maybe for you, again, going back to an earlier illustration, maybe you were afraid of your dad growing up. You feared his anger. You feared when he was in a bad mood, probably for good reason. But the older you got, the more that fear turned into hate, to the point that there is now no love for that man in your heart. You hate him with all of your being, to the point that you could, if you were able to see him again, sock him one, if you could. You hate him. Or maybe you fear rejection. And when your friend betrayed you and turned people against you, it hurt like you couldn't believe. But pretty quickly, that fear of rejection turned into hatred towards the rejecter, to the point that you hope one day to do the same to her, what she did to you. Fear fuels hate. And the overarching point of Saul's tragic story is that Saul does not gain anything by holding on to his hate. In fact, by letting his hate lead him, he loses everything. He descends into madness. You know, whenever I see an example of hate in our world, my mind always goes back to a scene from The Lord of the Rings, where the king Theoden, in the face of certain death from a terrible enemy, asks a really profound question. He says, "What can men do against such reckless hate?" And I wonder that often, right? Whenever I see that there's another school shooting, whenever there's another political division and posts all over Facebook of people talking about how the other side is evil, whenever there is a conflict in a family, I wonder, what can men do? What can people do against such reckless hate? But even more so, even more pointedly, what can you do against that reckless hate that is going to stir up in your heart? Because no matter who you are going to be tempted to hate, because you are going to fear something, right? Fear is a natural emotion. But how do we keep that fear from turning into reckless hate? Because you know who else is afraid in this story? David. He is afraid for his life. But as we're going to see, he seems to, in some way, keep his fear from becoming hate. How? How do you face your fear without becoming a bitter, hateful person? That's exactly what we're going to talk about next time. But for now, let's pray as we end our time in worship. God, we lift this morning's message to you. We lift this morning's time to you. God, we pray just for your help. There's so much hate in our world, so much hate even in our country. It can be so discouraging that we can, like King Theoden, just lift our hands in the air and go, what do we do? What are we supposed to do against such reckless hate? God, help us, even with this hate that so often develops in our own hearts, to not let it overcome us. God, I pray that first and foremost that we could come to you as we are afraid, as there are things that are sometimes legitimately scary, that are threatening to us. God, help us to cast all our cares on you. But God, I pray that if there's anyone here who's thinking through these things, a fear that has fueled hate, that you would help them to process that, work through that, and find a better way, a way that honors you. God, help us, be with us. God, may you receive all the honor and glory today. And it's in your name that we pray. Amen. Amen.